Leaders Live, where I get a chance to chat with luminaries in e-discovery and related areas. This broadcast is sponsored by Reveal Brainspace, the industry's leading AI e-discovery platform. Don't forget to subscribe to watch me, George Sosha, weekly with leaders in e-discovery. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Sosha. I head up brand awareness at Reveal. On each episode of eDiscovery Leaders Live, I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to revealdata.com, select resources, then select eDiscovery Leaders Live. Our guest this episode is Matthew Grant. Matt is Senior Director, Advanced Solutions International at Epiq out of Perth, Australia, hence the time for this episode. Matt, welcome.
Good morning, welcome. Thank you very much.
Yes. 8 o'clock in the morning for you, 6 o'clock in the evening for me, right?
Indeed, that's right. Yeah, international people.
There we go. Well, before we get into the substance of what I'd like to ask you about today, I'd like to first have you tell folks how it is you ended up in this world of e-discovery.
So probably not an uncommon story. I qualified as a lawyer many years ago now and ended up working at a firm where we were doing some big ticket litigation and we had millions of documents and all that kind of stuff. And I just remember sitting in a room looking at all of this paper and thinking there's got to be a better way to do this. There really has to be. And so, having spent my time at law school, playing with computers on the side, getting used to how databases work, all that kind of stuff, I found that I was actually more interested in the process of law and the business of law than I was in actually doing the law. So that's where it started. I started doing that, and then next thing you know, 20 years later or whatever it is, I'm an e-discovery guy. So yeah, there we go.
How then did you end up where you are today at Epiq?
I originally started doing this e-discovery stuff basically as a project manager. Then many years later, ended up as a consultant, covering all aspects of the EDRM and stuff outside it, legal operation stuff as well. And then Epiq, I joined roughly 7 years ago. Joined in what was then considered the consulting team, and about 5 years ago, I took on our managed review business. In EMEA, and added to that a year or so later our advanced solutions business, which is the exciting technology stuff, the stuff that Reveal does so well. And so then did that for a couple of years, and about a year ago, 18 months ago, I took on what Epiq calls international, which is everything outside of North America. So I cover EMEA and APAC, and based myself in Perth. So now I head up the advanced solutions and managed review businesses based in Perth, which is a lovely spot to be.
It's a lovely spot to be. Does it mean you are centrally removed from everything there?
As much as I possibly can be. No, not at all. It's actually pretty good. It's at the same time zone as most of APAC, so same as Hong Kong, same as Singapore, and my team stretch as far east as Auckland and as far west as London. So it's the least worst place I can run the team from. So yeah.
And although I haven't had a chance to be there yet, I hear it's a wonderful and diverse place.
It is. I can thoroughly recommend it. And for those of you based in Australia, please don't come west. We don't want to see you.
Okay. Well, I'd like to turn now to, I'll preface this by, I just spent just shy of 2 weeks in Australia. You and I were at a conference together in Sydney. One of the topics that came up at that conference and in many of the meetings I was at was the use of tar in Australia and how that differs quantitatively and qualitatively from the use of tar in the United States, especially, but in the UK as well. And I know tar is of some interest to you as well.
It is. Yeah, it's a passion. So it's been interesting being here. So I think Australia, I would say, so I preface this by saying that when I talk about the Australian market, I talk about the market or the English market. I talk about the market through the lens of what I see as a vendor. So I don't want to speak for all lawyers in these markets, but I can talk about the ones that we speak to, our clients, our customers. So in the Australian market, I have found that predictive coding in particular, but the use of analytics and TAR more generally is quite far advanced. Most firms will use predictive coding for document reviews by default, which is fantastic. Really good to see that they're so forward thinking about it. In the UK, it's widely used, but I would say there are still plenty of firms which are still dipping their toes in the water. It's probably not as embedded as it is that I found down in Australia. And I do wonder why that is. I think perhaps part of it is that the market here, the size of the market in Australia is that much smaller, and it's easy to get good ideas through and to get those good ideas across a smaller market than it is in the UK, where you have some very big ships, some very large tankers to turn, and it's a very large market to shift across. So it's been an interesting experience seeing how things work down here.
So as you look at the Australian market in particular, and you said it's the default in many of the firms. I'll come back to the default part of that. But first, the firms that you see that in, is that only whatever would constitute the top tier there? Or is it across the spectrum from large to small?
Across the spectrum from large to medium, I would say.
Okay.
All of the large firms that I speak to, all of them do this stuff, which is fantastic. And the medium-sized firms are all, I would say probably 80% of the projects that they do that are appropriate for it, because obviously not every project is appropriate for it. They'll take it on as a way of working. But again, I will say that this is through the lens of the way that Epiq works, that we work. So, for the way that we will run a project, we run analytics and technology assisted review by default. So,
what constitutes a medium-sized firm there?
That's a good question, and I'm not entirely sure I have a good answer for you. We kind of rank them in terms of the largest by size and by revenue to the extent that we get to see it, and then shear off perhaps the top 10, and then below that we call sort of the middle sector. Firms which are national, but perhaps not international.
So any order of magnitude senses to that middle part?
No, not really.
I know it has changed considerably in the past, what I've seen here, 3.5 decades.
Yeah.
A middle-sized firm in Minnesota, when I started practicing in '87, was probably, say, 30 to 50 lawyers.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Yeah, that is no longer middle-sized, not even remotely close to it. So my guess is that whatever you mean by middle-sized, it's a lot larger than that.
It is. When we look at a middle-sized firm, as I say, we think about a national firm, a firm that covers all states within Australia, but perhaps doesn't have an international presence. The large firms, although it's interesting, I suppose, the large firms tend to be very much national firms, but they also have an international presence. And a lot of the Australian firms have either a partnership with or are related to an English firm. So we do see a lot of that. There are a lot of, in terms of number, smaller firms that we do see in Australia, but those firms are international. So, there are a lot of American firms down here covering the APAC region in particular, but also the Australian side of things. So while numerically they would be considered to be small firms in an Australian context, they are absolutely, large firms, behemoths. So it's interesting working with those folks because a lot of them have a great deal of American experience and US experience, and they're used to dealing with American litigation and American regulators. So it's nice for us to be able to partner with those firms because we do so much work with them in other places. So.
Yeah. Now let's switch from the size of the firm to the prevalence of use. And I'll give some context here. It's been my experience. So again, we can only speak from our experience. The generalized polls I read are so generalized that they're not helpful for me, at least. It's been my experience that in the larger firms that I've worked with, so in the past 15 years, that's usually meant as a consultant or testifying expert. From what I can see, it appears that they have in-house e-discovery expertise that is used extensively by a small number of the lawyers a little bit by a larger number of lawyers who are dealing with litigation and investigations.
Understood.
And from my vantage point, not at all by a huge percentage of the lawyers in the firm who are working on what I think of as lawsuits or investigations that would warrant the use of predictive coding. How does it compare there?
Very much the same, I would say. We certainly see that the in-house capabilities the in-house capabilities belong to probably the top 5 to 10 in terms of size firms down here, and they're well used, and there's some fantastic expertise in those firms, and there really is, and you will have met some of those people over the years and at the conference we were at a couple of weeks back. The sense that I get speaking to them, though, is that they are heavily used for litigation in particular, certain kinds of regulatory inquiries, but perhaps not for investigative inquiries. So predictive coding, the sort of TAR models, that kind of stuff, TAR 1, TAR 2 and whatnot. TAR 2 in particular, I suppose, is widely used for that litigation and kind of competition regulations, that kind of investigation. But for exploratory investigations, where the investigation needs to be a little more discursive, the sense I get from the folks that we speak to is that they don't see the use of the tools as much.
What then are they doing for those types of investigations?
As far as we can tell, and as far as I hear, it's what I'm going to call old school. It's start with keyword searches, that kind of thing, and then most of them are in electronic platforms, which is great to see. But it's keyword searches. It's getting rid of documents that aren't a decent fit or are clearly not the kind of thing that they want to look for. And then just going from there, starting at document 1 and going through to document 10,000 or 20,000 or whatever it is, which is interesting, I think. Keywords are, I would say keywords are somewhat effective, but they're quite an old school way of dealing with this problem. There's always a sense that you need to be very accurate with the keywords that you choose, and that's hard to do. And one of the constant queries we get from our clients, at least, is, can you help us with our keywords? Can you find better keywords for us? And with the best will in the world, we do what we can. But at the end of the day, look, this is your project. I don't know the substance of it. We'll help you out where we can. But the recommendation that we typically try and make is, if you can, stay away from keywords. Because I've never seen a project where clients have decided to use keywords for their search, and they narrow the population down and they do the review of them, but then they never look at the subset of documents that weren't responsive to the keywords, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's potentially a mistake. I mean, at the end of the day, if all parties agree and the courts agree, that's fine, everybody's happy. But I do think there is the risk that you do miss out on stuff if you don't test that null set. And one of the nice things about predictive coding technologies and technology-assisted review technologies more broadly is that you're not reliant on your best guess at what keywords need to be. You're relying on a bit of a black box in some cases, the underlying technology, the natural language processing, to sort of make those connections for you. But then, as belt and braces, you always test the null set anyway, don't you? So,
right.
Yeah, I think it's
and aren't you always relying on a black box anyway? And how many of us understand how keyword searches actually perform?
Yeah, I think there's some truth in that. I mean,
we're familiar with them, but
sorry?
We are familiar with them.
Yeah.
We use them, but can we explain what the computer does when we type those letters in?
Perhaps not, no. I do think that they're a reasonably decent tool, though. They're a good place to start. But I think my preference, at least, and this is the thing that we recommend to our customers, is that if you're going to use keywords, use them to find a small set of documents that are relevant, that are responsive, and then let's put those into the model, because it's likely to do a better job. And machines don't get tired; they can smash through it in a way that humans can't.
So tell me a little bit then about the different workflows that you all use with predictive coding and other forms of analytics.
Sure. So many kinds, I suppose. And so standard predicting coding workflow for a piece of litigation or regulatory inquiry, we use it for both culling and for prioritization. So prioritization in almost all cases is the default way that we will run. Culling is, as a workflow, something that some clients are okay with and others are not. Prioritization is something that we would use extensively for regulatory inquiries where you have to disclose everything that's responsive to whatever the regulator is demanding. So we'll prioritize those reviews as a matter of course or by default. But culling is used typically by agreement by the parties. So we do see it. When we're running a document review, we will run predictive coding as a QC workflow. So we'll run it in the background regardless of whether our clients are using it to prioritize or to cull, but we use it in the background so that we can look at individual reviewers' decisions that they're making and whether they fit within what the model is saying is a relevant document and so on and so forth. So there's that kind of standard predictive coding stuff, and that's all very exciting and all well and good, but the stuff that really gets my team excited, us at Epiq excited, is the more discursive stuff. It's where a client comes to you and they say, we have a population of documents and these are the 2, 3, 5 things that we're trying to figure out. Can you help us with that? Now that's not a standard predictive coding workflow, but it's much more interesting. It means you get to use analytics tools that look at things like communications analysis or pattern analysis or clusters of documents which are conceptually similar or thematically similar, that kind of stuff. So we do a lot of that kind of work, particularly up in APAC, where discovery and disclosure is not really a thing in the way that it is in Australia or England or even the States. And so in, for example, Japan, our team spent a lot of time with Japanese clients doing investigative workflows, trying to answer these key questions. And it's actually a really interesting way of working. I think perhaps more interesting for my team than it is doing standard predictive coding workflow. You really get to use the interesting tools and really get to solve client problems in a way that in a more satisfying way than helping clients with a predictive coding workflow.
It sounds like an opportunity to use your brain a lot more.
Exactly that. Yeah. Everything's different every time, which is nice. So.
These different tools, whether it's TAR or clustering or concept searching or any of those, are all, among other things, ways to make review more efficient. And review efficiency has to be a priority if you're running a managed review operation. So share your thoughts about review efficiencies.
Yeah, sure. So one of the reasons that my group covers both the advanced technology stuff as well as the managed review stuff is that essentially they're trying to solve the same problem. Most of our clients come to us with too many documents to review in the time that they have available. So you can approach that in 2 ways. You can throw bodies at it, you can throw technology at it. The way that we try and approach it is to throw both at it. So throwing both at it allows us to bring efficiencies that you wouldn't get by using just one or the other. So when you use just a straight off technology, then one of the things that you potentially miss out on is the expertise of the lawyers who are driving the review. The lawyers that we hire and our expert review managers. But if you use just people, then one of the things that you miss out on is the ability to do things like, for example, the predictive coding QC that I talked about. So it's important to us to try and use the best of both worlds to make that partnership between people and technology the way forward for running managed reviews, and that partnership works for us from an efficiency perspective.
So that's a partnership, if you will, internally. It's your people using technology. There is another partnership and another opportunity for either efficiencies or efficiency disasters between your team and the folks at the law firms you're working with. What is that dynamic like?
It's great, actually. So we've been doing this for 1,000 years, obviously, and so most of our clients are very happy to work very closely with us on this kind of stuff. So the way that we build our managed review workflows closely ties in our clients, our law firm clients, or in some cases corporate clients if they're wanting to run it themselves. So we have a whole bunch of feedback loops where we use not only the human decisions that we make at what we call first level review and passing those up to the clients to make second level review of, but also technical measures. So we will put predictive coding models around the second level review that the law firms are using themselves and use those to feed back into our first level reviews so that we're getting the best of both worlds. We're using those models ourselves. My cat just wandered past in the background. But we're
Demonstrating
also,
it's a real background and not a fake one.
it is indeed a real background. So yeah, we use predictive coding models for our own review, but we also put them on our client reviews as well and use that feedback loop to improve the quality of the product that we create and that we pass off. So.
To what extent are folks from law firms involved in the process of building those predictive coding models?
Oh, always. We need some expertise to get them started, to get them kicked off, and we can't do that. I mean, we could, but really, what you want is somebody who really understands the case, which at the end of the day is going to be the lawyers working on it. So while we partner with them, if they give us good instructions, we can help build a model. What we prefer to do is have them do a little bit of training up front, or at least give us some key documents that we can start working with. So.
How involved do end clients get? The folks who are ultimately paying the bills?
Yeah, it depends. And this is something that varies across markets. So up in APAC through Hong Kong, China, Japan, we see a lot of direct end client involvement. In-house counsel there tend to be a little bit more hands-on than we find they are in the Australian market or in the UK. So we work quite closely with them, and they're always interested, particularly in the investigative tools. So that's quite exciting. In Australia and the UK, a little bit less so. I mean, some of our larger corporate clients have teams of people and big departments, so they're quite happy to get involved and pardon me, my speech has gone blank. So they're quite happy to get involved in this kind of stuff and dive in. But generally speaking, in Australia and the UK, we work at the direction of outside counsel.
When a regulator gets involved, it's a very different dynamic.
Yeah.
Than when you have two litigants facing each other. What does the process look like then when it comes to figuring out what technologies to deploy, how to deploy them, and when people are going to be able to make decisions about whether the results of the deployment are satisfactory?
Yeah, so the regulators rather that we typically end up doing projects that involve them are mostly competition, I would say. But regardless, the ask tends to be for, boil the ocean, give us everything. So the challenge really is to figure out what is it that the regulator is actually interested in. We're going to have to give them everything anyway, and we're going to have to review everything anyway, and we're going to have to, carve off a little bit for privilege or whatnot. But what is it that we think they're interested in, and how do we get ahead of that? How do we figure out what it is that they're going to ask us once they do have everything? Because we know that all the regulators have their own in-house technology assisted review kit, so we know that they're using this stuff as well. So the challenge for us is to help our clients get ahead of that curve, figure out what the regulator is going to be looking at, and surface that as quickly as possible so that they can make informed decisions about where to go and what's going to go next. So the kinds of things that we do, predictive coding is standard. We try and prioritize as much as we can, but we'll also use other techniques and tools as well. So we'll use things like clustering, communications analysis, so that as a parallel track to that predictive coding review, we can also hopefully surface stuff that our clients believe the regulators are interested in. So it's just a different way of exploring the data as well as getting through it as quickly as you possibly can. So.
There is, of course, a wide array of technological capabilities that you can bring to bear to the analysis of data. I'm not going to try to ask you to list all of them because, we got 6 minutes left. That's not going to happen. But instead, I'm going to flip the question on its head. Are there any types of tools or techniques? I'm not asking about brand names, but types of tools or techniques that you avoid or stay away from, and if so, why?
The only one that springs to mind, to be honest, is sentiment analysis. And the reason for that is that I'm not entirely sure that it's there yet. I think it's a fantastic idea, I really do. And I've seen a number of platforms that do it and all the rest of it, but I'm not entirely sure it quite does what it says on the tin yet. I think it will in time, but I think it's probably at an early point in its journey. It will be interesting to see what large language models the whole chat GPT and all the rest of it. As we start to see that kind of stuff embedded into the toolkit that we use, it'll be interesting to see whether that stuff manages to not only improve the way that sentiment analysis works, I'm presuming everyone's familiar with sentiment analysis, but what else it can bring to the table in terms of these investigative capabilities that the toolset uses. So, but really the only one. Other than that, we are fairly open to using whatever tool or piece of technology that we think is likely to try and solve the client's problem. And that's the way that we like to work, frankly. Like our preference as a client comes to us and says, this is the problem I need solving. Can you help us get there? This is the result that we need to get to. What's your recommendation? And we take it from there, and then use whatever we have in our toolkit to find the answer for them.
So I guess since you at least nudged the door open a little bit, what about generative AI, whether it's ChatGPT or any of the others? I had to go there, right?
Here we go, right? Okay, look, so I have seen two use cases in the legal tech world that I think are reasonably solid for these generative models. The first is actually in standard e-discovery predictive coding workflow. So one of the problems that you have with a TAR model and a predictive coding model is what they call the cold start problem, right? Like the system doesn't know what it doesn't know. It can take a long time to train the model, particularly if the richness of the document population is low. It takes a little while to get going. So I have seen a large language model used to kickstart that process. And the way that it does it is by looking at the input documents. So, the pleadings, the witness statements, the review manual, so to speak. It takes all of that material and uses that as a way of kickstarting the review. So I thought that was interesting. I mean, I haven't seen it used in anger. I would look forward to seeing it used in anger, but it was an interesting idea. And the other is outside of the discovery world, but it's in the legal research world. I think that I have seen a couple of products now which do a fantastic job of assisting with legal research. And I mean, you want to, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? You want to make sure you're training them on the right kind of material, but just the simple idea of a go fetch, to give me all of the case law, and you can speak it in the natural language, give me all the case law to do with issue X in jurisdiction Y over the last 5 years, and draft me up a quick summary, please. It's the end of a certain kind of paralegal, I think, perhaps, but it is a really handy way of getting that kind of research done. So those are the two that I've seen. Otherwise, I think watching brief, like obviously it's a super exciting technology, and I think it's going to revolutionize the business of law and the business of a whole bunch of different kinds of businesses. But right now, I think watching brief, and take it easy and see how it goes as it matures.
Well, any final thoughts for us here?
I don't think so. This has been a fantastic opportunity to have a chat with you, George. So I thank you for that. Yeah, it's an interesting. I think we're at an interesting point of inflection in the e-discovery world, but also in the legal operations and legal tech world. I think these large language models will make some radical changes to the way that we work and to the business of law. But yeah, let's see. I think the next 5 years will be an interesting spot.
Some say just the next 1 year.
Perhaps, if they're training themselves these days, we'll see what it looks like.
Yeah, very much so. Well, Matt, thank you very much. Matt Grant is Senior Director, Advanced Solutions International at Epiq. I am George Sosha. This has been eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks very much, George. It's been a pleasure.